What if the key to unlocking the life you've always dreamed of isn't found in your control, but in surrendering it all to God and letting Him surprise you with His greater plans? Welcome, everyone. Today I want to share something deeply powerful that has the potential to transform your life. Have you ever felt like you're holding on to everything so tightly, trying to control every detail of your life, but still find yourself overwhelmed, uncertain, or unfulfilled? Maybe you've asked yourself, is this all there is? Is this the life I was meant to live? Well, what if I told you that the key to experiencing true peace, purpose, and joy lies not in controlling your circumstances, but in surrendering them to the one who holds all things in His hands? Imagine for a moment that the very moment you let go of your own plans, you step into the breathtaking surprises and unimaginable blessings that God has already prepared for you. Surrendering isn't giving up. It's actually the pathway to receiving more than you could ever dream or imagine. In this video, we're going to explore how the act of surrendering to God's will leads to something far more than we expect. A life filled with His divine surprises, guidance, and a transformation beyond our wildest hopes. So, I invite you to stay with me through this journey, because what you're about to hear might just change everything. True surrender is not defeat, but the beginning of transformation. That statement may sound paradoxical, even unsettling, especially in a world that teaches us that power comes from winning, that success is in control, and that strength is proven by how tightly we hold on. But in the kingdom of God, everything is upside down, or rather, right side up. What looks like weakness is often the beginning of real strength. What feels like the end is often the doorway to something far greater. When we think of surrender, we often imagine someone waving a white flag, giving up in shame or failure. In the world's eyes, surrender is an admission that you've lost, that you've been beaten, that you have no fight left. But in God's hands, surrender is not defeat. It is the turning point where the old self begins to die and the true self is awakened. It is not the end of striving, but the beginning of becoming. It is not weakness, it is wisdom. To surrender to God is to say, I trust you more than I trust myself. I lay down my limited view, my plans, my timing, my control. I yield to your will, even when it doesn't make sense to me. That takes more courage than fighting. That takes more strength than clinging. Because our human nature wants to grasp and hold and calculate, but God asks us to open our hands and release everything we think we need in order to receive what He knows we were made for. Surrender is the soil where transformation begins to grow. A seed must first fall, be buried in the dark, and die before it can ever become a tree. In the same way, the moment of surrender often feels like falling. It feels like losing the ground under your feet. It feels like silence, mystery, vulnerability. But that is the exact place where God begins His most sacred work in us. He meets us in that space, not when we have it all together, but when we finally admit we don't. Consider the life of Jesus Himself. He surrendered to the will of the Father, not out of defeat, but out of deep trust and perfect obedience. In Gethsemane, drenched in agony, He prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." That prayer was not weakness, it was power clothed in humility. And through that surrender came the most glorious transformation the world has ever known. Death defeated, sin conquered, and new life made possible for all. This is the pattern of the kingdom. Life comes through surrender. We do not change by force, we are transformed by grace. And grace only floods in when we open the floodgates, when we let go of our defenses, our ego, our self-made identities, and we say, "Here I am, Lord, I am yours." And what's more, surrender is not a one-time act. It is a posture, a rhythm, a daily invitation. Every morning we are asked again, will you trust me? Will you release what you cannot control? Will you let me shape you, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's unknown? The answer to that question defines the shape of our lives. Some people think that surrender means a life of passivity, that we sit back and let life happen. But true surrender is not inactivity, it's alignment. It's saying, I will move, but in step with your spirit. I will speak, but with your words. I will live, but not for my will. Surrender sharpens our purpose rather than dulling it. It does not erase who we are. It reveals who we were always meant to be. There is a deep joy that only surrendered people know. It is not a joy rooted in circumstance, but in connection. An intimacy with God that is deeper than mere religion. It is a knowing that we are held, that we are seen, and that nothing we release to God is ever truly lost. It is placed into hands far more capable than ours. And in His hands, the surrendered life becomes the transformed life. What we thought would break us becomes what remakes us. What we feared would be the end becomes the beginning of a new, radiant kind of existence. A life not merely lived, but led, shaped, and loved by the one who created us. God's surprises come in the form of the unexpected and undeserved. Grace, by its very nature, is not something we can predict, control, or demand. It doesn't follow our timelines or fit within our understanding. It arrives, often, when we're least prepared for it, least deserving of it. And yet it is precisely in those moments that the fullness of God's love and power is revealed. The beauty of this truth is that it doesn't depend on our circumstances or our worthiness, but on the nature of the one who gives it. When we surrender to God, we open ourselves up to receive His surprises, blessings that come in ways we never could have imagined. These are not the gifts we expect, the rewards we've worked for, or the plans we've made. God's surprises often look completely different from the ways we envision His provision. It's not that the good gifts we desire are wrong, it's that God in His wisdom knows what we truly need far more than we do. And so His surprises come in ways that stretch us, shape us, and draw us closer to His heart. The scriptures are filled with stories of God surprising His people in the most unexpected ways. Consider the Israelites in the wilderness. They were hungry, tired, and uncertain, wandering in a land where no food seemed to be in sight. Yet God didn't just provide a meal, they were given manna from heaven, something they could never have predicted or planned for. And when they were thirsty, He didn't simply lead them to a nearby well, but caused water to flow from a rock. God's provision didn't meet their expectations, it surpassed them, showing them that His ways were not only different, but far better than what they had imagined. This truth is echoed throughout Scripture, where God consistently chooses to act in ways that defy human wisdom. Think of David, the youngest son, overlooked by his family, yet chosen by God to be king. Or Mary, a humble young woman from a small town, chosen to bear the Savior of the world. God often bypasses the powerful, the wealthy, and the famous, choosing instead to work through those who would seem to have the least to offer. This is not just a random pattern. It is a revelation of God's heart. His surprises are not based on who we are or what we have done, but on His grace and His purposes. They are meant to draw us into awe and wonder, to remind us that we are not in control, but that He is. God's surprises also come to us in ways we least expect, not because He is cruel, but because His understanding of our needs is far deeper than ours. We may pray for something specific, but His answer may be different, better, and far beyond what we could imagine. We might pray for healing, and God may not immediately remove the sickness. But in the waiting, in the struggle, He draws us closer to Himself, teaches us patience, and strengthens our faith. We might pray for provision, but God may not give us wealth. Instead, He may teach us contentment and trust, showing us that His grace is sufficient for every moment. God's surprises often come when we are least expecting them, in ways that seem contrary to what we thought was best. Yet these surprises are always a reminder that God is working in ways we cannot see, that His plan is unfolding in the hidden places, and that His timing is perfect. The moment we surrender to Him, we open the door to a life that is far beyond anything we could script for ourselves. He is not a divine vending machine giving us exactly what we order, but a loving Father who knows exactly what His children need, even before they ask. When we truly surrender, we stop trying to control the outcome, and we begin to trust that whatever comes, it is good, because it comes from a good God. His surprises will not always fit within the neat boxes we've created in our minds, but they will always be tailored to our deepest needs, our truest selves. Sometimes, those surprises come in the form of joy in the midst of sorrow, peace in the midst of chaos, or love when we feel unlovable. Sometimes they come in the form of opportunities that we would never have chosen for ourselves, or relationships that stretch us beyond what we thought we were capable of. But always, these surprises are an invitation to trust that God is in control, and that His ways, though mysterious, are always for our good. We must learn to embrace these surprises, even when they challenge us, even when they discomfort us, and especially when they call us out of our comfort zones. The more we surrender, the more we open ourselves up to a life that is filled with the unexpected, blessings we didn't ask for, gifts we don't deserve, and the transforming power of grace that leads us into deeper intimacy with the one who knows us best. The human heart was designed to yield, not control. We live in a world that praises strength and independence, where the message is often clear: you must hold the reins of your life, never let go, and strive to make things happen according to your own will. But God, in His infinite wisdom, has created us for something far different. We were never meant to carry the weight of our own stories alone, to rely solely on our own strength, or to control every outcome. We were made to yield to the Creator, to open our hearts and lives to His direction, and to trust that His guidance will always lead us to a place of greater peace, purpose, and fulfillment than we could ever produce by our own efforts. At the core of the human experience is a longing for significance, security, and love. These deep desires, placed within us by the Creator, are not meant to be fulfilled by striving or self-sufficiency. In fact, when we try to fill them on our own, we often find ourselves empty, exhausted, and disconnected from the very source of life. True fulfillment comes not from control, but from surrender. It comes when we release our grip on our own lives and trust that God, who knows us better than we know ourselves, is fully capable of leading us to the abundant life He promised. The act of yielding is not a sign of weakness, it is an act of great strength. It takes courage to admit that we cannot handle everything on our own. It takes faith to recognize that God's plans for us are better than anything we could arrange by our own limited understanding. The Bible speaks of a kind of surrender that brings us into a place of rest, a rest from striving, from self-reliance, from the burden of having to figure everything out. Jesus invites us to come to Him when we are weary, offering rest for our souls. This rest isn't passive, it's a deep, soul-level peace that comes when we acknowledge that God is in control, that He is sovereign over every aspect of our lives, and that He is good. In yielding, we return to the heart of who we were made to be. The human heart was designed for connection, for relationship with the Creator. It was designed to trust and to follow, to love and be loved. But too often we allow our fears, our insecurities, and our pride to convince us that we are self-sufficient. We build walls around our hearts, believing that if we let go of control, we will be left vulnerable, exposed, or perhaps even abandoned. Yet it is in yielding, in opening up, that we experience the fullness of God's love and provision. God, in His perfect wisdom, knows that true freedom comes when we lay down our desire for control. When we yield, we are not giving up our identity or our uniqueness. Rather, we are allowing God to shape us into the people He created us to be. In the process of surrender, we are not diminished. We are refined. We are not abandoned. We are embraced. We are not left to wander aimlessly. We are guided by the hand of the One who sees the end from the beginning. The act of yielding is also the act of receiving. When we open our hands, when we release our grasp on what we think we need, we make room for God to fill us with His presence, His peace, and His purpose. God's call to yield is not a call to weakness, but a call to trust in His strength, His timing, and His provision. It is a call to stop fighting against the flow of His will and to trust that His plans are better than our own. The world may tell us to control, to push, to achieve, but God's way is different. His way leads to life, to peace, to a joy that cannot be taken away. This yielding is not a one-time event, but a lifelong process. Every day we are faced with moments where we must choose to yield to God's will, to His leading, and to His ways. It's easy to get caught up in the hustle of life, to start believing that we must control our circumstances and our future. But in every moment, God invites us to yield to His plans, trusting that His way will lead us to the good things He has prepared for us. It's in the yielding that we experience the deepest transformation, where our hearts are shaped by His love, and our lives are aligned with His purpose. When we yield, we give God the freedom to work in us and through us in ways we could never imagine. His purposes unfold in our lives as we surrender to His will, and it is in that surrender that we find true fulfillment, peace, and joy. The human heart was indeed designed to yield, not to control, and when we embrace this truth, we discover that yielding is the key to unlocking the fullness of the life God intends for us. Surrender activates the divine imagination. This powerful truth reminds us that when we let go of our tightly held plans and allow God to take control, He begins to create something far more beautiful, intricate, and purposeful than we ever could have dreamed. In our human understanding, we often see life in narrow, predefined lines. We have our expectations, our desires, and our limited vision of what could be. But when we surrender to God, we are stepping into the vastness of His creativity. We allow Him to paint on the canvas of our lives with colors and strokes we never could have imagined. Surrender opens the door to the divine imagination that shapes not only our future, but our very identity. The moment we choose to let go of our plans and yield to God's will, we give Him permission to rewrite the narrative of our lives. Too often, we think that surrender means giving up on our dreams or losing ourselves in the process. But what we fail to see is that true surrender doesn't diminish us. It magnifies what God has placed within us. It's like a seed being planted into fertile soil, where it can grow, stretch toward the sun, and bloom into something far more fruitful than it ever would have if it stayed in the pot we tried to keep it in. When we surrender, we let God transform us from who we are into who He always intended us to be. Consider the story of Abraham, when God called him to leave his home and go to an unknown land. Abraham had no idea where he was going or what the future would hold. He simply trusted God and followed His leading. In that surrender, Abraham didn't just become the father of a great nation. He became a living testimony of God's faithfulness, an example for all generations of what it means to follow God into the unknown. The divine imagination was at work in Abraham's life, turning his small act of obedience into a legacy that continues to shape the world today. Abraham couldn't have seen that outcome in the beginning, but his surrender activated the unfolding of God's perfect plan. In the same way, when we surrender, we open ourselves to God's infinite creativity. Our dreams may be limited by our own understanding, but God's vision for us far exceeds what we could ever dream up on our own. Our desires may be good, but God's desires for us are always better. The moment we step into His will, we align ourselves with a divine narrative that is bigger, more complex, and more beautiful than anything we could ever plan on our own. God doesn't just want us to exist. He wants us to live fully, to thrive, and to become who we were created to be. But that transformation happens in the surrender. It happens when we allow ourselves to be shaped by His hand, when we stop clinging to our own control and trust that He knows the path to our fullest potential. When we let go, we make room for the divine imagination to work in us, molding us, refining us, and guiding us toward a life that is far more fulfilling than we could ever have imagined. Surrender isn't the end of our story. It's the beginning of a new, unfolding narrative that God Himself is authoring. This divine imagination is not just about our personal stories. It's about the greater story God is weaving in the world. When we surrender, we become part of something far greater than ourselves. We become co-laborers with God in His redemptive work. As we align our hearts with His will, He uses our lives to bring about transformation, healing, and hope to a broken world. Our surrender is not just about receiving blessings for ourselves. It's about stepping into a role in God's grand design. Each small act of surrender activates God's imagination for the world around us, and we become a living reflection of His grace and goodness. It's important to understand that God's divine imagination is not bound by our limitations. What we see as impossible, God sees as an opportunity to display His power. The Apostle Paul's life is a perfect example of this. Before his encounter with Christ, Paul's life was steeped in rigid plans and self-righteous goals. He was zealous for his cause, but blind to the greater purpose God had for him. When he surrendered his own ambitions and yielded to God's call, God's imagination opened up a whole new reality for Paul. He went from persecuting Christians to becoming one of the most influential voices in spreading the gospel. His life was completely reimagined, transformed into a vessel for God's glory. Surrendering to God's will doesn't mean we abandon our desires. It means we entrust them to His capable hands. It's allowing God to refine and reshape our dreams, to breathe His divine creativity into them, and to bring them into alignment with His higher purpose. And as we do, we find ourselves not only becoming the people God created us to be, but also experiencing a life that is rich, full, and overflowing with meaning. God's divine imagination is always at work, shaping our lives into something far more beautiful than we could ever conceive. When we surrender, we step into a story that is beyond us, one that holds the promise of transformation, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. In that space, we find the fullness of life, not because we controlled it, but because we trusted the one who created us and who knows exactly what we need. God is not tame, but He is good. This profound truth challenges the way we often think about the nature of God. In our desire for safety, predictability, and control, we can sometimes reduce God to a manageable, comfortable version of Him, a God who fits neatly into our boxes and meets our expectations. But the God we encounter in the Bible is not tame. He does not operate according to our schedules or align with our human understanding. He is unpredictable, mysterious, and awe-inspiring, and yet, through it all, He remains steadfastly good. The wildness of God is not a threat. It is a profound invitation to trust Him more deeply and to experience the fullness of His presence in ways we could never imagine. The wildness of God is seen throughout Scripture. Think of the ways he revealed himself to his people in a burning bush that did not consume, in a cloud of smoke and fire that led the Israelites through the wilderness, in the still, small voice that spoke to Elijah on Mount Horeb. God doesn't fit into our neat categories or expectations. He shows up in unexpected ways, sometimes overwhelming us with his power, sometimes whispering softly to our hearts. In his presence is both terrifying and comforting, awe-inspiring and intimate. This tension between God's wildness and his goodness is what makes our relationship with him so profound. The very nature of God's wildness means that we cannot always predict what he will do next. He is not bound by our understanding or our finite abilities. He is the creator of the universe, the one who spoke the stars into being, who formed mountains from dust and carved oceans into the earth. He is not bound by time or space, and his ways are far beyond our comprehension. Yet, in his wildness, God chooses to enter into relationship with us. He invites us to trust him, to surrender to his ways, even when they are beyond our understanding. This surrender is not an act of weakness. It is an act of faith in a God who is good and trustworthy, even when his ways seem strange or difficult. In the wildness of God's character, we also see his deep commitment to our transformation. God does not want us to remain in the safe, predictable patterns we have created for ourselves. He desires to shake us free from our self-imposed limitations, to stretch us beyond our comfort zones, and to bring us into a fuller understanding of who we are in him. This process of transformation is not always easy. It can be uncomfortable, unsettling, and even painful at times, but it is always for our good. In his wildness, God is refining us, making us more like Christ, and shaping us for the purposes he has planned for us. When we allow God to be wild in our lives, we open ourselves to the adventure of walking with him. We no longer try to control every aspect of our lives, but instead we embrace the unpredictability of his ways. We may not know where he is leading us, but we trust that he is good and that his plans for us are always better than our own. The wildness of God means that he is constantly surprising us, calling us into new territories of faith, obedience, and love. We may be asked to step out in ways that feel uncomfortable or even impossible, but it is in those moments of surrender that we experience the fullness of his goodness. At times, we may be tempted to shrink away from God's wildness. We may fear the unknown, or we may resist his leading because it challenges our comfort and security. But the truth is, it is in embracing the wildness of God that we experience the most profound transformation. God is not tame, but he is always good. His wildness is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. It is the wildness of a Father who loves us so deeply that he refuses to leave us where we are, but instead calls us into something greater, something more beautiful, something more fully alive than we could ever have imagined. When we surrender to God's wildness, we are invited to step into the mystery of his love and to trust that though his ways are beyond us, he is always working for our good. We may not always understand why he leads us down certain paths or why he allows certain things to happen, but we can trust that he is good and that his purposes will always prevail. The wildness of God doesn't mean chaos or disorder. It means that he is not bound by our expectations or limitations. He is free to do far more than we can ask or imagine, and in his freedom he leads us into the fullness of life. God's wildness is a call to surrender, to release our need for control, and to trust in the goodness of the one who holds the universe in his hands. When we embrace his wildness, we step into the adventure of faith, knowing that he is good, he is faithful, and he is always working for our good. In the wildness of God, we find freedom, transformation, and the deep, unshakable peace that comes from walking in alignment with His will. In conclusion, when we surrender to God, we unlock the profound truth that He is always working beyond our understanding, surprising us with blessings, refining us, and leading us toward a future more beautiful than we could ever envision. Surrender is not about losing ourselves, but about discovering the fullness of who we are in Him, stepping into His divine imagination and trusting that His ways, though wild and unpredictable, are always good. God invites us to yield to Him not out of weakness, but out of faith in His power and love. The journey of surrender is the journey to greater peace, greater joy, and deeper intimacy with the Creator who holds our lives in His hands. In embracing His wildness and surrendering our control, we find ourselves not only transformed, but also aligned with the greater story He is writing for all of creation. Thank you all for your time, your hearts, and your openness to God's calling. May you experience the wild, good, and surprising love of God in new and powerful ways as you choose to surrender to His perfect will. God bless you all.